There are no pain nerves inside your liver. It can get inflamed, fill with fat, and start scarring for years without ever sending you a signal you'd read as a warning. What it does send are small, boring signals that look exactly like normal life. So today, I'm giving you 10 of them with the biology behind why the liver causes each one, plus the 2 I eventually found in myself. And near the end, I'll get to the sign everyone puts at number 1, which is mostly wrong. Sign 1, the tired that sleeping doesn't fix. This is not the tired you get from a bad week of sleep. The pattern people describe is a drop in capacity, not sleepiness. You start a task you've done 100 times and your battery empties halfway through. You go to the gym and the same workout feels like you're dragging a sled. Then you sleep 8 hours, wake up, and the tiredness is still sitting there waiting for you. A lot of people also notice they get flattened after a big meal, like they need to lie down for 20 minutes before they can function again. Here's why the liver produces that specific flavor of tired. Your liver is the organ that keeps your blood sugar steady between meals because it stores glucose as glycogen and drips it back out when you need fuel. It also takes the first hit after you eat, since most of what you absorb goes straight to the liver to be processed before it reaches the rest of you. That's an enormous chemical workload. When liver cells are inflamed or packed with fat, they still do the job, just with less headroom. So you feel fine at rest, and you fall apart under load. Fatigue is also the single most commonly reported symptom in people who turn out to have liver disease, with estimates ranging from about half of them to most of them, depending on the study. Now, on its own, this sign means almost nothing, and I want to be honest about that up front. Everybody watching this is tired, and the causes are usually sleep, stress, iron, or thyroid. What makes it worth a second look is the shape of it. If your endurance dropped, if rest doesn't repay the debt, and if 1 or 2 other things on this list are also true for you, that's when it stops being a coincidence. Sign 2, words going missing and your sleep sliding later. This one is the reason I started paying attention in the first place. It shows up as a mild, weird cognitive slippage. You lose the word you were reaching for, you reread the same paragraph 3 times, you walk into a room and genuinely cannot retrieve why you're standing there. And the sneaky version is your sleep clock drifting. You get more alert at midnight and useless before noon, and you decide you've just become a night person. The mechanism here is beautifully simple and slightly unsettling. When your body breaks down protein, one of the leftovers is ammonia, which is toxic to your brain. Your liver's job is to convert that ammonia into urea so your kidneys can dump it in your urine. When the liver can't keep up, ammonia levels in the blood creep up, and your brain gets the overflow. Doctors call the severe version hepatic encephalopathy, and in advanced disease, it goes all the way to confusion and coma. But there's a mild, early version that people mostly explain away as burnout. There's even a little pen and paper test for it, where you time yourself connecting numbers scattered across a page in order, and a slower time can hint at that early fog. I'm not a doctor, so I'm not going to tell you that fog equals ammonia. Caffeine, bad sleep, and too many browser tabs will produce the same symptom in a perfectly healthy person. But brain fog plus that endurance drop from sign 1 is a combination I'd stop ignoring, and it's exactly the pair that eventually pushed me to get blood work. Sign 3, itching that moves around and has no rash. Most itching is just skin, dry air, a new detergent, eczema, a bug that got you in your sleep. The liver version looks different in 2 specific ways. First, there's usually nothing to see, so you scratch and the skin looks basically fine underneath. Second, it travels. Today it's the palm of your right hand. Tomorrow it's your heel. The day after it's your back. And a lot of people say it gets loudest at night when they're lying still in the dark. The reason has to do with bile. Your liver makes bile acids and sends them down into your gut to help you digest fat. If bile flow slows down or backs up, those bile acids rise in the blood instead, and doctors think that rise plays a real part in that maddening whole body itch, even though exactly how it triggers the itch is still debated. That's also why the internet version of this symptom annoys me. You'll see people claiming that bile salts are literally getting deposited in your right palm, which is why your right palm itches. That's not how blood works. It's a systemic thing, so it turns up wherever it feels like turning up. And it's measurable because a doctor can order a bile acid panel and check. Worth saying clearly, this one usually shows up later in the story, not on day one. If you have a persistent itch with no rash and no explanation, and it's been weeks rather than days, that's a blood work conversation and not a stronger moisturizer. Sign 4. Tiny red spiders on your skin and bruises you can't explain. Look at your chest, your shoulders, your upper arms, and your face in decent light. What you're looking for is a small red dot with thin threads radiating out of it, like a spider with legs. The name is spider angioma. The second half of this sign is bruising. You catch your thigh on the corner of a desk and get a bruise the size of a plum. Or your gums bleed every time you brush, and you've decided that's just your normal. Both of those trace back to jobs your liver does quietly. Your liver manufactures most of the clotting proteins in your blood, so when it's struggling, you bleed and bruise more easily than you should. It also handles the breakdown of hormones, including estrogen, and when estrogen isn't cleared efficiently, small blood vessels dilate and become visible at the surface. In men, that same hormonal drift can show up as softer, smoother skin, thinning hair on the legs, or breast tissue that gets slightly tender. Skin changes like these turn up in a meaningful share of people with chronic liver problems. One honest caveat, because I don't want you spiraling in front of a mirror tonight. Plenty of red dots on skin are just red moles, or little hemangiomas that have been there for years, and pregnancy alone produces spider angiomas in perfectly healthy women. The pattern that matters is new ones appearing, several of them, in that upper chest and shoulder zone, alongside bruising that doesn't match the impact. Sign 5. Vitamin D that won't budge no matter what you take. This is the one that got me, and it's the reason I have any business making this video at all. I was supplementing vitamin D properly, I was outside a lot, and my level came back low anyway. Not catastrophically low, just stubbornly, annoyingly low, in a way that made no sense for someone doing everything the internet told him to do. My first instinct was the dumbest possible one, which was to take more. What I didn't understand is that vitamin D isn't active when you swallow it or when your skin makes it. It has to get switched on in 2 steps, and the first switch is in your liver, which converts it into the storage form that shows up on your blood test. The second step happens in your kidneys. Your liver is also where a big chunk of vitamin D gets stored. So if your liver is inflamed or fatty, you can pour vitamin D in the top and still see a low number at the bottom, because the conversion step is the bottleneck, not your intake. And this is where it stops being an abstract lab value. Low vitamin D drags down immune function, calcium handling, and muscle tone, so what you actually feel is getting sick more often, aching for no reason and feeling weaker than your training should allow. In my case, fixing the input never worked, because the input was never the problem. That was the moment I stopped treating a number and started asking which organ was in charge of that number. If your vitamin D refuses to climb on a sensible dose, ask your doctor to look upstream instead of just raising the dose again. Sign 6. Fat suddenly disagreeing with you. Here's a change people almost never connect to their liver. Foods you used to eat without a second thought start causing problems, and the pattern is specific. It's the fatty ones. A ribeye, a plate of fried food, a big creamy sauce, and afterward you get bloating, gurgling, loose stool, mild nausea, sometimes a full evening of feeling heavy and wrong. You end up quietly editing your own menu and blaming your age. The explanation is bile again, because bile is your liver's dish soap. Fat doesn't dissolve in water, so your liver produces bile acids that break it into droplets your enzymes can actually work on. When bile production or bile flow drops off, that fat goes through you only partly digested, and your gut bacteria throw a party with the leftovers. That's the gas, the urgency, and the nausea. Digestive complaints like these are extremely common in liver disease, and depending on which study you read, anywhere from 1/3 to 8 out of 10 patients report them. Appetite tends to travel along with that, and it can get oddly specific. Some people go off meat entirely, and smokers sometimes describe suddenly not wanting a cigarette at all. The useful part is that this sign is testable at home in the least glamorous way possible. Notice whether your bad days track with fat intake rather than with total food volume. If a huge, low-fat meal is fine and a small, fatty meal wrecks you, that's a bile story, and bile is a liver and gallbladder story. Take that observation to your doctor because that's genuinely useful information for them, and it beats cutting out entire food groups on a hunch. Sign 7, the two colors nobody looks at. Nobody wants a segment about what's in the toilet, so I'll keep this efficient. You're watching two colors. The first is urine that has gone dark, and I don't mean the concentrated yellow you get on a hot day with no water. I mean a deep amber or a cola shade that stays dark even after you've been drinking properly all morning. Some people also notice the smell gets sharper and more chemical. The second is stool going the other direction, losing its color instead of gaining it, turning pale, tan, or the shade of wet clay. In some cases, it floats. Both colors come from the same substance, and once you know that, this stops being gross and starts being genuinely clever. Every day, your body retires old red blood cells, and the leftover pigment from that is bilirubin, which is yellow. Your liver picks it up, packages it, and ships it out in bile. And that bile is what gives normal stool its brown color on the way through your gut. So when the liver is struggling or bile flow gets sluggish, less pigment goes down into your intestines, and your stool fades. Meanwhile, the bilirubin that can get out that way backs up into your blood, and your kidneys start dumping it in your urine, which darkens it. Pale, greasy stool with a stronger smell than usual points to the same bile problem from the last sign, though the floating itself actually comes from trapped gas rather than fat content. The same pigment explains the sign everyone already knows, which is yellowing of the eyes and skin. That one only becomes visible once bilirubin in the blood climbs well past normal, which is why it belongs at the late end of this story rather than the early end. Before you panic at your own toilet, know that B vitamins, beetroot, blackberries, and a few common medications will all recolor your urine, and one dehydrated morning proves nothing. What counts is days of it in a row while you're drinking normally. Bilirubin sits on the same basic blood panel as your liver enzymes, so this is a cheap thing to settle with a test instead of a guess. Sign 8. Driving at night, getting harder. This is my favorite one on the list, because you would never in 100 years connect it to an organ in your abdomen. The complaint sounds like this. Night driving has become stressful in a way it wasn't a few years ago. Oncoming headlights smear, and when you walk from a bright room into a dark hallway, your eyes take much longer to adjust than they used to. Some people also get a permanent gritty, dry feeling in the eyes, like there's sand under the lid that no drop ever really fixes. The chain here runs through vitamin A, and it needs your liver twice. First, vitamin A is fat-soluble, so you can only absorb it out of your food with bile, and bile comes from the liver. Second, your liver is the main storage depot for vitamin A, and it also builds the transport protein that carries that vitamin through your blood out to your retina. Once it arrives, your retina turns it into the light-sensitive half of the pigment you see in dim light. That piece gets used up every time light hits your eye, and it has to be rebuilt in the dark before your vision comes back. So a struggling liver can leave you with plenty of vitamin A on your plate and not enough of it reaching your eyes. Now the obvious objection, and it's a fair one, bad night vision is usually just eyes. It's your prescription drifting, it's early cataract, it's dry eye, it's your age, and honestly, it's usually one of those. But here's the thing I like about this sign. If your optometrist tells you your eyes are structurally fine and the night vision is still getting worse, that's a genuine clue that something upstream is off. Most people stop at the eye exam and never ask why the eye is short and what it needs. Sign 9. Your socks start leaving marks. You can check this one in about 10 seconds tonight. Pull your sock off at the end of a long day and look at your ankle. If the elastic left a deep ring pressed into the skin, that's fluid sitting in the tissue. Then push your thumb into the front of your shin. Hold it a few seconds and let go. If the dent stays there like memory foam, your body is holding water where it shouldn't be. Most people blame the flight, the salty dinner, or the heat, and most of the time they're right. What matters is when it stops being occasional and becomes your normal, every single evening. Here's the part nobody explains. Your liver builds most of the protein floating around in your blood, and the main one is called albumin. Albumin behaves like a sponge, holding water inside your blood vessels instead of letting it seep out into the tissue around them. When a stressed liver makes less of it, that water drifts out and gravity decides where it lands. That means your ankles, your feet, and the fronts of your shins by evening. Later in the story, scarring starts squeezing the veins that drain your gut. Pressure builds upstream, and fluid can pool inside the abdomen instead. That's the tight, bloated belly people mistake for weight gain. I'll be honest, this is a terrible sign to self-diagnose with, because your heart, your kidneys, and half the pills in your medicine cabinet can produce exactly the same puffy ankles. But there's a practical angle I really like here. Albumin sits on the cheapest, most basic blood panel your doctor can order, right next to your liver enzymes. So if your socks have been leaving marks for weeks, you don't need to sit at home guessing. Ask for the panel and let someone qualified read the number. Sign 10, that heaviness under your right rib. Here's the one I promised you at the top, and it's the sign almost every liver video on the internet gets wrong. You've probably heard that a dull ache under your right ribs means your liver is in trouble. I believed that too for years. Then I found out the liver tissue itself has no pain nerve endings inside it. You could press directly on that tissue and feel absolutely nothing. What does have nerves is the thin capsule wrapped around the outside of the organ. So the only way your liver can make itself felt is by swelling until it stretches that wrapper from the inside. That's exactly why real liver damage stays so quiet. Fat and scar tissue build up over years, and the capsule stretches slowly enough that it never files a complaint. The version you actually can feel is fast swelling. Take that stitch under your right ribs when you sprint without any training. I used to repeat the story that your liver floods with blood and swells during hard effort, and it turns out that's backwards, because blood gets pulled away from the liver and the gut when you push hard. You're much more likely feeling your diaphragm or the lining around your organs complaining. And if you get a real squeeze on your right side half an hour after a greasy meal, that's usually your gallbladder and your bile flow talking. Which still matters, honestly, because sludgy bile and a fatty liver tend to show up as a package deal. So here's how I'd actually use this one. Forget sharp pain, because that's simply not how this organ speaks. Look instead for a vague fullness on the right side that hangs around for weeks, especially when it arrived alongside 2 or 3 other things from this list. On its own, it means almost nothing. Sit in next to dropping stamina, a sock mark on your ankle, and stool that went pale. It becomes a pattern worth putting in front of a doctor. One sign off this list means nothing. I want to be really clear about that, because the last thing I want is you lying awake tonight because your ankle looked puffy. Every single one of these has a boring explanation that's far more likely than your liver. The rule I use on myself is 2 or more running together for weeks rather than days. That's the threshold where a coincidence turns into a pattern, and a pattern is worth 20 minutes and a needle. And you don't need anything exotic. A basic blood panel with liver enzymes, biotin, and albumin, plus an ultrasound if your doctor thinks it's warranted, will answer the question that this entire video can only guess it. The reason I care about catching it early is that this organ is unusually forgiving. Fat and liver cells and even early scarring can improve a lot when you take the load off, mostly through what you eat, how much you drink, and how much weight you're carrying. That window doesn't stay open forever though, because late-stage scarring is a different conversation entirely. So the goal isn't to diagnose yourself from a YouTube video. The goal is to notice a few years earlier than you otherwise would have. If you want the practical side of this, the habits I actually run, I already made that video. It's called How to Clean Your Liver, and this one is the checklist that comes before it. My honest take after going down this whole rabbit hole, I still think most liver content online is fear selling you a cleanse, and I'd skip nearly all of it. But I was wrong to assume silence meant health. My own tell wasn't dramatic. It was flat energy and a vitamin D number that refused to move, and I ignored both for the better part of a year. If two of these sounded uncomfortably familiar while you were watching, tell me which ones in the comments, because I read those, and it tells me what to dig into next. See you in the next one.